contributions, sacrifices, and lives are an eternal source of inspiration for us. Let us revisit their stories and honor their memories. André Soltner, chef whose Lutèce became pace-setter, dies at 92. His Manhattan restaurant made him one of the most acclaimed French chefs outside of France. André Soltner, the Alsatian-born chef whose Michelin-starred Manhattan restaurant, Lutèce, brought him renown as one of the most acclaimed French chefs outside of France, died January 18 at a hospital in Charlottesville. He was 92. His friend and executor, Glenn W. Dopf, confirmed the death, but did not know the immediate cause. Winner of the world's most prestigious culinary honors, including the Meilleur Ouvrier de France in 1968, Mr. Soltner steadfastly championed classical cuisine, the freshest ingredients, simply prepared. He apprenticed in the Alsace region as well as in Switzerland before a stint as executive chef at Chez Hansi in Paris turned the head of the legendary French chef-restaurateur Andre Surmain. Surmain proposed going into business together with a restaurant in the United States. Mr. Soltner, then 27, accepted, and Lutèce, an ancient name for Paris, opened in 1961 on the ground floor of a Manhattan brownstone. Surmain ran the front of the house while Mr. Soltner oversaw the kitchen for $95 per week. The restaurant hinged on bankruptcy for years. Mr. Soltner confessed that he and his partner made many costly mistakes, including an uptight, formal seating approach. It was also a struggle, he said, to find high-quality ingredients. "I couldn't get the raw materials," Mr. Soltner told Nation's Restaurant News decades later. No chanterelles, no oversaw, the bread was miserable. He was ready to quit and return to France, but Mr. Soltner persuaded Surmain to sell him 1/3 of the business, and they began a gradual climb to the top of the profession. Soltner moved into the top floor of the brownstone that housed the restaurant, where he could better follow every detail of operations. Each morning, he would walk downstairs, past the second-floor dining room to the ground-level kitchen, and assist his staff in even the most mundane kitchen prep work. The chef's reputation for perfection was such that he could rely on his suppliers to deliver only the best from the market. They knew he had no fear of sending back subpar turbot or escargot. He cultivated an enthusiastic staff, paying everyone from the maitre d' to the bartenders above New York City's minimum wage to keep talent. "Even the dishwasher is crucial here," he once said. He won over critics and diners with Tornadoes Wellington, pied de pork, pig's foot, glazed in mustard, and other masterfully plated classics. He had the talent, rare among chefs, of being as skilled as a baker as he was as a cook. He was averse to the overly modern or trendy and to heavily stylized reimaginations of French standards, preferring instead such classics as hot raspberry soufflé or delicate petit fours. In 1972, when Mr. Soltner became sole proprietor, the restaurant was in full ascent. Such was the demand for seats, even with expense account prices, that reservations were often booked well in advance. All but a few say that Lutèce richly rewards the wait and expense. A critic for the Zagat Guide wrote, "Zagat named Lutèce the top restaurant in the country for 6 straight years in the 1980s. Lutèce became a pace-setter for Manhattan cuisine, eventually garnering 4 stars from the Times and inspiring chefs around the country with its consistency. "Soltner is one of the most honest and rigorous chefs there can be," wrote French food critic Christian Millot, who co-founded the Gault and Millot culinary guides. If there were more men like him in American and French kitchens, gastronomy critics would be able to take more vacations. Mr. Soltner and his wife Simone, who served as the restaurant's hostess, rarely did. The pair seldom left the restaurant in almost 30 years of operation. Mr. Soltner missed only 4 days in the kitchen while he presided over Lutèce, 2 when his father died and 2 when his brother died. The chef hung up his apron in 1994, telling his clientele that he was exhausted. "I woke up," he later recounted to New York Magazine. "I said, 'Oh my God, what did I do to my wife?'" He sold Lutèce to the Arc Restaurants Group for a reported $3 million. A decade after Mr. Soltner's departure, Lutèce shuttered because of dwindling quality. Mr. Soltner remained active in the culinary arts, teaching classes aboard international cruises and through the French Culinary Institute, later known as the International Culinary Center. The chef, who preferred to think of himself as a soup merchant, bemoaned gastronomic techniques that smacked of chemistry more than craftsmanship. "People say molecular is fantastic," Mr. Soltner told Vanity Fair, describing a cooking genre that heavily emphasizes the physics and chemistry behind food preparation. "And, people say Picasso is a great, great artist. But a common guy like me looks at a Picasso and he says, I don't understand. One hand is here, one eye is there. It's now the same thing with cooking. You understand?" André Soltner was born in Thann, in eastern France, on November 20, 1932. His father was a cabinet maker. André desperately wanted to follow his father into the trade and turn to cooking when the business fell to an older brother. Mr. Soltner had been fascinated by his mother's devotion and care in the kitchen. Decades later, when asked to describe his cooking, he summoned memories of his family hearth and told the Times, "I cook Soltner. It's what I feel." At 14, he began a 3-year apprenticeship at the Hôtel du Parc in Thann, followed by further training at hotel restaurants in the Normandy region and in Switzerland. After obligatory military service, he went to work at Chez Hansi. His future wife, Simone Gomez, was a waitress there. They married in 1962. The Soltners continued living at the top of their Manhattan townhouse until 2004, when they moved to a new apartment. For the first time in his life, Mr. Soltner owned a microwave. His wife died in 2016. They had no children. Survivors include his companion of 8 years, Mary von Gasparini, and a sister. At the time of death, he was visiting Gasparini in Charlottesville. He lived in Manhattan and had homes in Hunter Mountain, New York, and Cannes, France. Long after his restaurant closed, Mr. Soltner remained an eminence in his field. But even in his prime, he tried to downplay lofty expectations heaped on him by critics and customers. "Some see coming to dinner here like going to paradise," he told Nation's Restaurant News in 1986 about Lutèce. "Maybe it is a little better than most restaurants, but it's still only a restaurant, and I'm still only a cook. I'm not giving them a baby," he said wryly. "I'm only cooking for them." George Kalinsky, 88, Madison Square Garden's first official lensman, dies. With camera in hand, he parlayed a chance encounter with Muhammad Ali into a photography career, documenting the Knicks, the Rangers, and Garden headliners like Elvis Presley. George Kalinsky was on vacation when he spotted Muhammad Ali and the sports commentator Howard Cosell walking together on a street in Miami Beach. Camera dangling from a shoulder, he followed them to a boxing gymnasium and talked his way in by claiming to be a photographer for Madison Square Garden. At the time, in 1966, Mr. Kalinsky said, "I was lucky to be the photographer for my own family." He capitalized on his contrived access by approaching the Miami Herald and selling it a photo of Ali training for an upcoming fight. As soon as he returned home to New York, Mr. Kalinsky used the one roll of film he had shot of Ali, the world heavyweight champion, to land a freelance assignment from the Garden's boxing department. He began shooting boxing matches regularly, as well as working Knicks basketball games and Rangers hockey games. And by the time a new Garden opened on the west side of Manhattan in 1968, he had become its first official photographer. Mr. Kalinsky, perhaps best known for his photo of Willis Reed, the Knicks' wounded captain, stepping onto the Garden floor for Game 7 of the 1970 NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, died on Thursday at a senior living facility in Manhattan. He was 88. His son, Lee, said the cause was complications of Parkinson's disease. Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, said in a statement, "I can't think of anyone who has been part of more events at Madison Square Garden than George Kalinsky. He was a gentle soul who loved many generations of Knicks players who in turn loved him back." In an interview for this obituary in 2021, Mr. Kalinsky recalled his quick and expedient thinking to pose as a Garden photographer. Not that Angelo Dundee, who was Ali's trainer, actually believed him. "Okay, comedian," Mr. Dundee told him. "Come on in." Mr. Kalinsky had wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist, a position he interviewed for at the Miami Herald during his 1966 vacation. But he came to discover that his artistic skills were transferable to the camera. Over the next 5 decades, until the pandemic made him a less ubiquitous presence at the Garden, most headliners who appeared there, including presidential aspirants during political conventions and Pope John Paul II in 1979, ended up in Mr. Kalinsky's portfolio. He cultivated working friendships with many of them, including Ali and Frank Sinatra, who sought his tutelage during a 3-hour lunch before the first Ali-Joe Frazier fight in 1971. After Mr. Kalinsky got the boxers to pause their simmering hostilities for an acclaimed nose-to-nose promotional photo before the fight, Sinatra, carrying his own camera in a Garden ringside seat, wound up shooting what became the cover of the March 19th issue of Life magazine that year. Mr. Kalinsky's photos have appeared widely on television, in print, and in museums, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and even at Graceland, where his images of Elvis Presley in his trademark white jumpsuit during a 1972 Garden concert were displayed in 2008. In 2019, a Kalinsky collection was accepted into the Library of Congress. He also worked for the New York Mets and Radio City Music Hall. On May 8, 1970, minutes before the Knicks tipped off Game 7 against Wilt Chamberlain and the Lakers, Willis Reed was in the locker room receiving injections to numb the pain shooting down his right leg from an injury sustained earlier in that championship series. While an anxious sellout crowd awaited word on whether Reed would play, Mr. Kalinsky left his courtside station to check on him. The two were good friends. "I was more worried about Willis hurting himself permanently, about not being able to walk for the rest of his life," he said. Just as Mr. Kalinsky approached the locker room, Reed emerged with a stiff-legged gait, and as he hobbled out of the tunnel and onto the court, Mr. Kalinsky followed him. He wound up taking the defining shot of the night, beyond the 2 game-opening baskets Reed scored to launch the Knicks' blowout victory and the franchise's first title win. Mr. Kalinsky captured the hulking Reed from behind as he advanced toward his relieved teammates taking warm-up shots around a basket. Behind them were rows of euphoric Knicks fans and even some of his competitors shooting photos of Reed's face. The photo found a home in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Mass. In 2021, the hall gave Mr. Kalinsky its Kurt Gowdy Media Award. George Kalinsky was born on April 14, 1936, in Hempstead, NY, on Long Island, one of 3 children of Samuel and Faye Rosen Kalinsky, who owned a children's furniture business. He went to Hempstead High School and studied art at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in industrial design in 1958. He worked as an art director for an advertising agency before his photography breakthrough. Mr. Kalinsky married Ellen Wexelblatt in 1960, and the couple had 2 children. In 1998, 2 years after she died, Mr. Kalinsky married June Azule, a psychotherapist. They later divorced. In addition to his son, he is survived by his daughter, Rochelle Kalinsky, and 4 grandchildren. Among the guests at Mr. Kalinsky's second wedding were Reed and 2 other former Knicks stars, Dave DeBusschere and Earl Monroe. "George is the thread that's kept all of us together," Monroe told the New York Times for a vows column. Mr. Kalinsky also connected his Knicks friends with other star performers he had photographed over the years. In the 1970s, his first wife took him to the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. Arthur Blessitt, who carried cross on global pilgrimage, dies at 84. Beginning in 1969, the evangelical preacher said he carried a cross to every nation and continent on journeys that covered more than 43,000 miles on foot. Arthur Blessitt, a one-time street preacher in Los Angeles who set off on a cross-country trek on Christmas Day in 1969, hauling a 12-foot cross to begin what became a more than 43,000-mile pilgrimage on foot that he claimed touched every continent and nation, died January 14 at age 84. The death was announced in a statement posted by his ministry based in Littleton, Colorado. No cause or other details were given. As Mr. Blessitt's odyssey added more miles and places on the globe over the decades, his early self-styled image as a simple Christian wanderer became infused with his flair at promoting his evangelical work. In essays and videos, he shared details of his adventures, his struggles, such as run-ins with authorities and once losing his cross to thieves, as well as encounters with religious leaders such as Pope John Paul II and the Reverend Billy Graham, and others, including a surprise meeting with Palestine Liberation Organization head Yasser Arafat in war-ravaged Beirut. He also noted his place in the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest ongoing pilgrimage, which was aided by donations from supporters of his ministry. His website kept a running tally of facts and figures, updated as recently as 2023. Miles carried cross on foot, more than 43,340 miles, 69,748 kilometers. Steps, about 86 million. Average shoe life, 500 miles. Cross weight, 45 pounds. Earlier crosses weighed more, first one 110 pounds, he wrote, had to reduce to fit airline weight limits. Biggest animal scares: green mamba snake in Ghana, baboon attack in Kenya, elephant chase in Tanzania, crocodile attack in Zimbabwe. Highest mountain climbed with the cross: Mount Fuji, Japan, 12,388 feet. This would, he told Christianity Today in 2009 while running his hand over the well-traveled cross, is my friend. The first steps of his saga began on Hollywood's Sunset Boulevard, where Mr. Blessitt in 1968 had opened a ministry and coffee house called His Place, in a rented building next to a club with topless dancers. Mr. Blessitt constructed a wooden cross to hang on the wall. He sometimes hoisted the cross on his shoulder to walk the streets of Hollywood. On December 25, 1969, he set off for Washington, inspired by what he described as a vision to display his faith with stamina and resilience. Mr. Blessitt was already a well-known fixture of Hollywood's street scene. Dubbed the Minister of Sunset Strip, he ministered to Hell's Angels bikers, was arrested several times for preaching on the streets, and once chained himself to his cross in a dispute with the landlord seeking to evict his coffee house. The first day I started walking in sandals. This had been my common footwear on the Strip, but at the end of the first day's walk my feet were blistered, he wrote in an autobiography posted on his website. The next day they were worse. I had to buy some walking boots. The bottom of Mr. Blessitt's cross also scraped along the ground. The wood was wearing away quickly. Mr. Blessitt made an adjustment that would stay for the rest of his trips, adding a wheel. He arrived in Washington in the summer of 1970 and later set up a street ministry in New York's Times Square. He then took up his cross and was back on the road again. His first journey abroad came in May 1971 in Northern Ireland, which was then gripped by sectarian violence between Catholic and Protestant factions. At one point, a British military patrol ordered Mr. Blessitt and his traveling companion to put down the cross and get into an armored vehicle. They were questioned and released. When they returned to the spot where they were detained, the cross was still there. I walked into the world to meet people face to face, he wrote. To hear the hurting and lost calling out, to hear the message of love and hope, as well as the screams of hate, anger, and rejection. In 1979, Mr. Blessitt traversed the dense jungle of the Darien Gap between Panama and Colombia. Diseases, parasites, leeches, rabies, fungus, mosquitoes, and ticks, he wrote. Later that year, after visiting Pope John Paul II at the Vatican, his cross was stolen in Assisi, Italy, when he stopped for a meal at a roadside cafe. He found the cross abandoned in the middle of a road with cars swerving to avoid it, he recounted. In the early 1980s, he walked through Beirut across battle lines between Muslim and Christian factions. One day at about midnight, he said PLO militiamen arrived at his hotel unannounced. He was taken to see Arafat, who gave him a cross inlaid with mother of pearl as a gift. During the 1990s, he walked through former Soviet republics and managed to talk his way over the Uzbekistan border without a visa. He said he was held in police custody dozens of times, including for preaching in Madrid's Plaza Mayor and on charges of soliciting donations in Concord, New Hampshire. In North Korea, Mr. Blessett was under tight restrictions, but said he carried his cross from his hotel to the main road outside. In Antarctica, he stumbled onto King George Island in 1988 with his cross after a storm-tossed passage from Chile on a 150-foot boat. Cross taken by boat, estimated 20,000 miles. Cross taken by air, estimated 2.33 million miles. Cross carried by car, estimated 435,000 miles. Mr. Blessett said he carried the cross through 324 countries, island groups, and territories. Some visits lasted just minutes. In 1998, he and his wife drove across the United Arab Emirates with the cross lashed to the top of their car. Mr. Blessett said he slipped over the border into Saudi Arabia and held the cross atop a sand dune. Once, while carrying his cross in Canada on a snowy day, Mr. Blessett said a woman rolled down her car window and asked, "Did you ever go to school?" He said he replied, "I went to high school, I finished college, and went to graduate school for a while." She looked amazed, he recounted, then said, "Don't you think you can get a better job than this?" Arthur Owen Blessett was born October 27, 1940, in Greenville, Mississippi. His father was an officer in the Air Force, then the Army Air Corps, and the family moved frequently while he served during World War II and eventually settled in West Carroll Parish, Louisiana. Mr. Blessett said he first took an interest in evangelical Christianity from traveling preachers in northeastern Louisiana. He studied at Mississippi College in Clinton, Mississippi, and enrolled at the Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary. He said he left after one semester to begin outreach in nightclubs and bars and reaching the hurting people of our time. Mr. Blessett's books include The Cross, 38,102 Miles, 38 Years, One Mission, 2008, and A Walk with the Cross, 1978. His travels also were chronicled in documentaries including The Cross, 2009. His marriage to Sherry Ann Simmons ended in divorce. In 1990, he married Denise Urja Brown, who accompanied him on many of his trips. Other survivors include 6 children from his first marriage, an adopted daughter, 12 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, and a sister. In 2000, while carrying his cross on Cape Cod, he was asked by a reporter about the condition of his feet. He took off his hiking boot and peeled down his sock. "Look, no bunions, no pain," he said. "It's a miracle, really."